Great. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Wine Quality Alliance seminar with Carol Wilson. We're going to do a recording for the first 12 minutes, and then we're going to do Q&A after that. So I'm going to hit share, and then let me know if you have questions.
Hi, my name is Carol Wilson Millerick, and I'm based in Napa and Sonoma counties. I've been working in the wine industry for over 20 years and in the winemaking and wine growing fields. I have a degree in viticulture and enology, and my interests are in regenerative and organic agriculture. I really enjoy learning techniques to improve wine quality in the vineyard. And the focus of this presentation is on the basics of viticulture for winemakers. There will be time for questions after the presentation, which should take about 15 to 20 minutes. We will be reviewing the growing season, the importance of phenology and growing degree days, a brief review of key pests and diseases to be aware of, and the importance of site characteristics. Here we have an illustration of the 2022 growing season with data taken from the Pleasanton Simms Station. This illustration maps out the timing of general North Coast viticulture activities in relation to temperature and rainfall. So let's review the viticulture activities. I'll focus on spring for now. Phenology refers to the grapevine's biological events. The vines are dormant until the average temperature of above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And in 2022, it occurred for many sites earlier than the 5-year average due to the warm temperatures in February and March. Typically, each phenological event after Budbreak occurs within approximately 6 to 8 weeks from one another. However, weather can speed this up or slow it down. Climate concerns. After Budbreak, frost is a concern, and until the first full moon in May, it continues to be a concern. But it really depends on site characteristics, whether this frost issue has a longer duration or not. Based on this data, it looks like there were a few days in March that were below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. That wasn't the case at other locations. In fact, 2022 was known to have later frosts in some areas and hail. In 2023, there has been reports of shoots without clusters on canes that experience severe hail in 2022. And that's because in 2022, with late season frosts, it can impact the fruitfulness in the next year. Because the shoot is destroyed so late in the season, the secondary shoot that emerges is less fruitful and doesn't have time to develop properly. Weather conditions during bloom are critical to quality and yield. Cold or hot temperatures can affect fertilization. Rainfall can dilute the pollen, and wind can also be an issue with shoots that are not secured. Vineyard operations. Pruning can occur in December for some sites, but typically it is done in January or February, depending on weather. It is ideal not to prune in the rain, as the pruning wounds are susceptible to trunk diseases. And they will continue to be susceptible to these pathogens until the callus over. Typically, a pruning protectant is applied soon after pruning. Cultivation includes mowing and disking. Most growers wait until the cover crop has seeded before mowing. Some frost-prone sites will need mowing to lower the frost zone and to allow air to be mixed if wind machines are used. Also, there are frost nucleating bacteria that can be found on some plants, in which case mowing them down will reduce the threat of frost. Disking typically occurs to eliminate competition to the vines or to warm up the cold soils. There is a trade-off for doing this. A plowed pan could develop, and loss of soil structure and the warming and drying of soils later on in the season. Canopy management starts with suckering, removing all excess shoots and helping the vine to focus its energy on the desired growing shoots. It also opens up the canopy to allow for improved spray coverage. Here we have a photo of what suckering looks like. The photo on the right was taken this week in a Napa Valley floor vineyard. It is very easy to assess the vine after suckering. And what you want to look for is uniformity of growth and fruitfulness. How many clusters are developing? Are there clusters? As the vines grow, they are tucked into the wires to help direct the growth and to protect them from wind damage. This is called shoot positioning. You will also see leafing being done on the morning side, often at the same time as suckering and shoot positioning. Removing leaves below the cluster to improve airflow, and later on, lateral shoots that emerge from the lower leaf axils will be removed. Phenology and growing degree days. We reviewed some of the phenological stages, and now we'll be looking at growing degree days. They are a unit of heat measurement calculated by using the average daily temperature and subtracting the base temperature of 50. The growing degree day can be used to predict phenology. Unfortunately, it does not account for excessive heat events when the vines shut down and are no longer active. That is why it's important to note when the heat event occurs, and we'll be going over this in more detail in the next presentation. Tracking the accumulated growing degree day can provide insights into the growing season. Here we have graphed the data taken from Western Weather Group stations located in 4 sites in Napa. Comparing the 2 growing seasons, we can see that 2022 had a warmer start to the season compared to 2023. And bloom occurs around 400 to 500 accumulated growing degree days, depending on the variety and site, typically related to sunlight hours. In 2022, we reached about 400 growing degree days around mid-May, and this year we're trending about 1 to 2 weeks later. We can also see that the inland sites in St. Helena and Oakville are much warmer sites and accumulate growing degree days much quicker than the southern sites of Soscol and Carneros. Often I am asked, will a later bloom lead to a later harvest? And really that depends on what happens next. Weather events can speed up or slow down when harvest will occur. And site variation, vineyard practices, and water availability can also contribute to these factors. Keeping historical records for the vineyards you source from will be very helpful as a reference. Here are a few key factors to keep in mind. A cool and wet spring will lead to delayed growth, and once the warmer temperatures arrive, there'll be excessive growth. Increased canopy management will need to be done to keep the vine in balance, and to ensure that once the bloom occurs, berries are set. Then the vine focuses on berry development rather than vegetative growth. A warm and dry spring following a drought year like 2021 will require earlier irrigation and earlier suckering to ensure shoots grow enough to support desired fruit load. Reviewing the vineyard operation plan with the grower, knowing the soil, rootstock, and water supply status will help to provide perspective. So in review, we talked about the spring viticulture activity, how growing degree days can help forecast phenology, and some key factors to keep in mind. And finally, we touch upon a few key pests and diseases to be familiar with. I've listed a few here, and I highly recommend visiting the UC IPM web pages for more detail, and also to visit the UC Cooperative Extension Napa Interactive Viticulture website, which I've listed here at the bottom. It provides real-time monitoring, mapping, and curated resources to learn more. I'm a big fan of the Napa Farm Advisor, Dr. Monica Cooper, and the work she and her team are doing. It's important to know the vine health status of the vineyard, in particular red blotch, which affects sugar loading, Pierce's disease, and trunk diseases that affect the vascular flow of water and nutrients. Leafhoppers suck the nutrients from the leaves, and if left uncontrolled, can decrease the photosynthetic area of the vine, which is a big problem with weaker sites with smaller canopies. Be aware of pests that vector diseases. Mealybugs can vector leaf roll, and looking for ant activity and wet trunks with honeydew indicate where they are active. Tika also, which is the acronym for three-cornered alfalfa hopper, is a vector for red blotch, and looking for girdling of the petioles is a key indicator that they're present. Sharpshooters like the blue-green sharpshooter and glassy wing sharpshooter are vectors for Pierce's disease. Finally, we have powdery mildew and botrytis. Being aware of these hotspots in the vineyard, where they are and where they're typically happening again and again each year, can be helpful when sourcing fruit from growers and going back and ensuring that those areas are controlled. If you're interested in learning more, I really do highly recommend visiting the Napa Valley's UC Cooperative Extension website. The next presentation will be in June. We will continue to review the growing season and focus on vine balance, fruit exposure, and heat damage, and also ripening disorders. Let us know if there's any other items of interest. Many thanks for your time, and please feel free to ask questions. I'll do my best to provide the answers.
Okay, thank you, Carol, for the video. Now we're opening it up for questions and answers. So if people want to show me their faces, that would be great. And now, Carol, if you would just want to introduce yourself again, now that people can see your face.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carol Wilson Millerick, and yeah, I'm happy to be invited to speak to you all, and hopefully I can answer any questions that you have.
Carol, thanks for the presentation. Out of curiosity, there's quite a bit of leaf roll and red blotch in Livermore. So, the vines are already infected. What would you, how do we combat that now? How do we get the sugar loading and get the fruit ripe?
Alec, that's a great question, and one that it seems like every grower that I come across battles with. And in fact, that's one of the main topics in past couple of years, and I believe it will continue to be so. Once you have leaf roll, once you have red blotch, they're not going to go away. One thing to note, and I'll talk about them separately, leaf roll is an associated virus. So like leaf roll disease, there are different viruses. There's leaf roll 2, which a lot of growers think it's fine and it's not impairing or impacting the vine. There's leaf roll 3, which you want to be aware of. That's a major one. Doing vine health assessments in the fall is critical to having an understanding of the footprint so that you can make decisions and have plans of action to either rogue and replace or redevelop. And the threshold typically for determining whether or not you're going to just remove individual vines and replace them versus redeveloping a whole vineyard is about 30% infection. Now, 30% infection, take that with a grain of salt, because you really want to understand, number one, do you have the vector present? Yes or no? If you have the vector present, then you may have to consider even a more detailed plan and phasing things so that you don't get reinfected. Now, if you're roguing and replacing, that's great, but it's really important to track the vineyard health through the years, because you can actually get that spread. A lot has to do with partnering with your grower, your viticulturist, and spending that time and money to map the vineyard. There's great technical tools available. There are a lot of GIS mapping tools that I've actually personally helped growers set up. And in fact, there's a lot of growers that are wanting to do this right now, because it is a huge topic. Now, I was speaking specifically of leaf roll, but the same applies to red blotch as far as your mapping and your threshold. So about 30% is the threshold for determining whether or not you're going to remove the whole block and replace it, or just rogue and replace singular vines. Red blotch is a little bit different. Red blotch is challenging because because of the sugar loading issue. Yes, it's going to have it, even if it's not expressing, but the vines might perform a little bit better if they're not stressed. For example, last year, some of the vines got really stressed with these major heat events. The vines that had red blotch got stressed with these major heat events. So they just stopped sugar loading. They really could not recover from that. So you saw a lot of lower bricks numbers. Those vines are really not going to be good performers when you have stress events. A year like this year, it reminds me a lot of 2019, except just on steroids with all the rain that we got. In 2019, our red blotch vines, they didn't start expressing the red symptoms at the basal leaves until later on in the season. So it seemed like we were good and fine, and we were able to get the sugars we wanted, but we also didn't have any extreme heat events late August, early September. So that's my long-winded answer to your very challenging and insightful question. Alec, there's so much more to talk about. I mean, you could do a whole couple seminars on it, but I hope I answered at least some of your questions, Alec.
Yeah, thank you. A little bit. I'd say from what I've seen from multiple growers in the valley, leaf roll is probably a little bit more prevalent. And I think like the mealybug is the vector, which I think moves with the wind. And so I see the challenges of just ripping out those vines and replanting. And then if your neighbor has it, I mean, you kind of have it too. But yeah, I would love to learn more about when we get to like that 22 bricks, those leaves start turning red, we lose the chlorophyll. How do we kind of push or get there faster? Maybe in the next presentation.
Yeah, I'll be addressing that. Before the next presentation, I really encourage you all to go to that UC Cooperative Extension website that I had in the presentation, because in Napa, those are the main issues too, but they've invested a lot of money and curated a lot of resources that could help answer some of your questions. And they're also mapping and showing real time these infection rates and even where the vectors are. So they're monitoring the flight of the vine mealybug males. We know that there are other mealybugs like grape mealybug, but it's really important to know what type of leaf roll virus you have. Do you have leaf roll 2, leaf roll 3, leaf roll 4, or 8? Because some of, if you have leaf roll 3, that's going to be a big problem. And if you have the vine mealybug, that's going to be a big problem. Right now, people are really focusing on monitoring, mapping what they have, really understanding, and then testing to confirm, because you can't really, doing visual assessments without confirmation from tissue analysis is not really the way to go, because it could be a couple different things. It could be a nutrition deficiency. It could be leaf roll 2 and not leaf roll 3. They're not all vectored by vine mealybug. Leaf roll 3 definitely is. That's a major one. Controlling vine mealybug is going to be priority. So we talked about monitoring. Controlling vine mealybug is going to be the top of the list every year. Hit it hard. A lot of growers are putting out traps so that they can monitor the flight of the males. They're doing pheromones. They're doing mating disruption. Sorry, I just couldn't think of a word. They're doing mating disruption, hitting that hard. And typically the male flight happens when no one's spraying. So these mating disruptions, there's little cards that you can hang on a vine, and they're distributed throughout, or you can put it in the spray tank as a partner with your sprays and apply it to the vine. The sprays last every 30 days, but the little cards, the little basically cards that they hang, depending on the vendor, they can last up to 5 or 6 months. The height of the male flight is typically when no one's spraying and everybody's thinking about harvesting grapes. So it's really important to get that coverage and ensure that mating disruption is a major application and out in the vineyard in September and October. We don't want the males to find the females. The females are going to be underneath the bark. And by the time you get to August and September, you know where they're at. It looks gross. It's wet bark, moldy, honeydew everywhere. You see ants all over the place. Those are the hot spots. Those are the spots that you want to control. Putting out ant bait is another way to control the ants. You don't want ants to be active. If you see them, take care of them right away with your ant baits. I mean, there's so much more. I don't want to take up all of your time and talk about red blotch, but it is a major, major issue. I mean, sorry, leaf roll. It is a major issue. Red blotch is, and that's a little bit different as far as controlling it. But yes.
Does anybody else have some questions for Carol? Just to give you an idea of what we're doing, this is just the first of a series of talks she's going to give. So we're just talking about things that you're going to see at this time of year. So if you have things that you'd like her to discuss in our next talk, which will be in June, you can communicate with me, or I can give you her information as well. If you'd rather have a direct question to her, that's totally fine. But I'm trying to think if there were any things that you wanted to deep dive into right now while you have Carol available. Please ask your questions.
How do you get more color out of red grapes or build more?
So the question was, how do you get more color out of red grapes or build more? Okay. So typically with red grapes, everything depends on fruit exposure. We're going to be going over that in the next presentation. If the red fruit is exposed early on, then your dappled light. Let me just couch that with the fact that fruit exposure is a fine art. It's like you want the Goldilocks. You don't want it too much or too little. starting with the row direction is key. Row direction, just like I believe it's northeast to southwest. You want it so that when the sun's going over the vine, that you've got shading during the hottest part of the day, during solar noon, which is about 1 o'clock plus or minus. Some of these hillside vineyards don't have the luxury of getting that optimal row orientation. And that's when you see shade cloth come out. So the whole thing about that is you want the vines, you want the clusters to be exposed a little bit early because they're going to get the tannins, and they'll be able to also get the phenolics and the anthocyanin precursors. So that's typically from set to veraison. Let me see. Basically, you want a little bit of exposure so you can get those phenolic precursors, but then you want to protect it. And typically after that last spray, you'll see shade cloth come up on the hillsides with poor row orientation. And where you have good row orientation, they're allowing the leaves to cover the afternoon side. So that's why you'll see people pulling leaves on the morning side. The reason why you want to have that coverage is you do not want to have sun damage to those berries. Essentially what that does is it arrests and stops the enzymatic activity that transforms those phenolic precursors into color. It basically stops that from happening. So oftentimes when you get that heat damage, solar damage, you'll see pinking. When that occurs, you're not going to get more color. It's stopped, it's arrested. Sometimes I see that when we get these heat events right around veraison. The berries are so vulnerable to that happening. And unfortunately, if there's too much exposure, or if the shade cloth isn't up at the right time, that really impacts your quality. As far as building that color, I always think to fermentation, you need to have enough tannin but to bind with that color and lock it in. And I know Julie's been working on presentations about tannin and color. So that's my take on it.
One of my thoughts from a talk I heard earlier today was that it's important to expose the berries to sunlight when they can kind of create their own sunscreen. And so you're kind of doing that prior to veraison, pulling the leaves earlier in the year so that you create that sunscreen on your berries so that when you do get to the hotter part of the summer, the berries can handle the heat better. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so typically leafing, I mean, on these vertical shoot positioned trellises, there's a lot of leafing being done. However, and I totally am a believer in getting the berries acclimated, getting their sunscreen. It's proven you'll get a lot more phenolic material. And if you have a longer duration, a time period from set to veraison, you have more time to build those phenolic sunscreen. So you have more tannin. And when we were looking at that illustration of the temperature and the phenology, you can actually see if you're tracking your phenology, like the 50% mark for bloom and then veraison, you can actually see where you might have 60 days. You might have a longer extended period. And there are some years that we have that and actually has more time to create those tannins and the phenolic material. That's ideal. but I have seen it where it's been excessive. And typically you see that in mountain hillsides where they're really exposed. So there's something to be said for vine balance. There's something to be said for having them exposed, but not too exposed. The challenge is we don't know what type of weather is going to be thrown at us at any given season. I've also been a grower rep in Lodi, and there are times where you do not want those clusters to be exposed. Once they're exposed too much after veraison, they could get the solar damage. It's a trade-off. That's why a lot of people are going to single wire trellis. They're going to the California sprawl, going back to the California sprawl, and then also investing in these shade cloths, because you get the best of both worlds with the shade cloth. You get the exposure from set to veraison, and then you get protection from veraison to harvest.
How important is the pruning protection after pruning? And is there, do you look at the weather forecast, at the age of the vines, or do you just do it every year?
So I've seen vines that haven't had pruning protectant, and they're typically the ones that have the highest incidence of trunk disease, Eutypa, Botrospharia, and in general, the common practice is to apply pruning protectant every year. And there's different types now, like with the industry, there's a lot more available than there was 10 years ago. Unfortunately, these older vines never had the luxury of having pruning protectant options. So the older vines tend to have more trunk diseases, but organic options, there's Viticulture. I don't believe this is classified or registered for organics, but there is an alternative to the chemicals, is using biological pruning protectant. I'll have to get back to you on which one that is. I trialed that one year and I thought it was really successful. It's just using competition to outcompete. But yes, to answer your question directly, Rhonda, it's important to do every year. You would want to do it within 24 hours, because once that wound is exposed, pathogens just can come in very, very easily. And typically the pathogens spread with rain and wind.
So do you think the fact that we had so much rain this year means people are going to have more challenges than they would have had in other years?
I mean, it depends. I think it's going to be a boon for a lot of people that are water poor, that really, really needed their reservoirs to be recharged, their groundwater to be recharged. I see it as a blessing, really, because we were running out of water. We were having to drill new wells. We were having to truck water in. So we were also struggling to get our canopies up to a decent size to be able to hold the actual fruit load that we desired, or what our normal fruit load was. So I see it as a good thing. The other benefit to that, I mean, there's also a trade-off. The con, or the thing that's not so great about it, it's going to require a lot more costs for vineyard operations. There's going to be a lot more canopy management. We're going to need to control those vines, especially in more vigorous sites. We are going to need to make sure that the vegetative growth gets in check by the time we have those berries set, or else they're going to be competing for the energy. One of the biggest things I see benefiting from the rains is the soil biology. So once the soils warm up to about 50 degrees, biology in the soil is going to be your friend. It's going to basically mineralize and make available nutrients in the soil free. It's free nutrients. It's also going to, if you do disc in, it's just going to create those nitrogen for any like bell beans or nitrogen fixing plants. So there's pros and cons to it. Again, I always look to the weather scenario, just really understanding where we're at, and then going back to your historical records and saying, oh, I remember in 2019 it was cold and wet, or that this other year was warm and dry. Good and bad things. I would also like to add, just from a pest and disease point of view, you're probably, with all of the vegetative growth, it might be an issue for coverage. So you'd probably see, depending on how the weather goes, we might have some mildew risk come our way. And with this fast growing canopy, we'll want to get on those sprays. Also, the insect populations, they change and shift. So last year, we had such a warm start to the season, we had more insect issues. We had more leafhoppers and different species of leafhoppers like Virginia creeper coming our way, which is very hard to control. We also had, believe vine mealybug was an issue last year. It spread quite a bit. And I believe that is because of the excess of nitrogen in the plants when we had that cool down. So is that going to happen this year? Probably not so severe. And with the rains and the cold weather, it really knocks down these insects. So a lot depends on how they rebound. Monitoring, sorry about that. Monitoring for those, if you're concerned about vine mealybug, monitor for that. If you're concerned about red blotch, monitor for the three-cornered alfalfa hopper. But yes, these different weather patterns really do affect everything.
So I think also, because you're not from the Livermore area, if anybody has data that they want to share with Carol, she can use it in our next talk. If you feel like you want to see data that relates more to what you're seeing in your vineyard, I can get you in contact with her so that we can use that data instead. I know that it's hard to come across that data unless you know somebody who's working and has a vineyard in the location you're trying to talk about. Anybody else have any other questions? I think that's about it. I wanted to just say thank you to Carol for taking the time to talk to us. I know she raced home from work to give this talk tonight. We will be having another meeting, second session of this topic in about a month. And so if you have questions that you come up with after the fact, please let me or Carol know, and we will definitely add that to our next talk. If you have data that you would like her to take a look at, she can definitely take a look at that and add it into the talk for next time. So do you have anything else you'd like to add, Carol, or should we just sign off now?
I would just like to add, any feedback is welcomed. I'm new to your group, so I'm trying to keep the presentation very basic, but if you're more advanced or you want to dive deeper on certain things, please just let me know and I'll focus more on those things that are specific to what you're interested in. And yes, by all means, if you have weather data or phenological data, super helpful. Also, if you have any issues with ripening disorders, that's good to know as well.
Well, thank you, Carol, and thanks everybody for coming to our talk. And we'll see you soon. Thanks a lot.